Welcome to Daily Review, your daily dose of literary exploration. We dive into books that spark curiosity and ignite growth. While our passion often leads us to nonfiction reads that empower and improve your life, no book is off limits. From gripping thrillers to insightful memoirs and compelling fiction to historical accounts, we're here to share and discuss all the interesting reads we discover. Tune in for your next great book idea.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Daily Review. We truly appreciate you joining us for your daily dose of literary exploration. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue to share these amazing books with you.
If you're enjoying what you hear, please consider taking a moment to subscribe, rate, like, and comment on any of the platforms you're listening from. This really helps support our channel and allows us to get better and bring you even more great content.
If today's review sparked your interest and you're ready to dive into a copy of the book, please consider using the link in our description to make your purchase. Not only does it make it easy for you to get your hands on the book, but it also directly supports our channel and the author, allowing us to keep bringing you more great content. Thanks again for being a part of the Daily Review community.
Okay, so let's jump into today's deep dive. We're tackling something that honestly can be really tough and frankly quite painful sometimes, how to deal with high conflict personalities.
Yeah, it's a challenging area. And today we're drawing from some really practical insights, specifically from excerpts of Bill Eddy's book, 5 Types of People Who Can Ruin Your Life. You know, the subtitle is about identifying and dealing with narcissists, sociopaths, and other high conflict personalities.
And Bill Eddy, he's got this really interesting background, right? He's not just coming at it from one angle.
Exactly. He's a psychotherapist, but also a lawyer, a mediator. And he co-founded the High Conflict Institute. So he's seen these kinds of dynamics play out in therapy rooms, in courtrooms, in workplaces, pretty much everywhere.
Right. So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive is to really cut through all the noise.
Right.
We want to pull out the absolute core ideas from the source material, the key stuff to help you understand the patterns, these predictable patterns of people who just create so much difficulty and crucially, give you some actual techniques for handling those interactions.
And the hope is really that by learning to recognize these patterns, you might be able to save yourself. Well, a lot of frustration, a lot of heartache, maybe even real agony down the line.
Yeah, saving yourself the trouble. What's kind of amazing, though, is Eddy's core idea that even though dealing with these personalities feels chaotic, completely overwhelming, their behavior is actually surprisingly predictable.
It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But the argument is they operate within this narrower, more rigid framework of thinking, feeling, and behaving compared to most people. Once you see the framework, the actions start to make a certain kind of sense, a predictable kind.
Predictable chaos.
Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. But if it is predictable, that means we can understand it. So what exactly is a high conflict personality, or HCP? What are those core things, those characteristics we should look for?
So Eddy highlights 4 main characteristics that tend to cluster together. First, there's a lot of all or nothing thinking. Everything's black or white, right or wrong, good or bad, very little room for nuance or gray areas.
Okay, so like if you're not 100% on my side, you're basically my enemy. That kind of rigid thinking.
That's exactly the flavor of it. Second, you see intense or unmanaged emotions. Their feelings often seem extreme, maybe way out of proportion to whatever triggered them, and they really struggle to regulate those feelings.
So it's not just about feeling things strongly, because lots of people do that. It's the management piece, or lack thereof. Precisely. The lack of effective management. And third, this often spills over into extreme behavior or even threats. We're talking actions or words that go way beyond a normal disagreement. Stuff that feels aggressive, intimidating, or just totally disproportionate.
Right. The kind of behavior that makes you just stop and think, whoa, wait, what just happened? Where did that come from?
Exactly. And the fourth piece, which Eddy really emphasizes as central, is this preoccupation with blaming others. They're constantly focused outward, looking for someone else to pin the blame on for anything that goes wrong. They always need a target of blame.
Okay, so it's that mix. The rigid thinking, the huge uncontrolled emotions, the extreme behavior, and always pointing the finger somewhere else. It's not just one thing, it's the whole cocktail. Is that blame piece what really defines the high conflict part?
That combination seems to be the key driver. It fuels the repetitive nature of their behavior, making it predictable across different situations, different people. They get kind of stuck in that blame cycle.
Okay, that makes sense. Predictability gives us a handle. Now, the source also makes a point about compassion. It's not just about slapping labels on people and calling them evil.
No, definitely not. And that's a really important nuance in the source material. Eddy stresses that HCPs aren't necessarily choosing to be malicious in the way we might think of a movie villain.
Yeah.
These personality patterns often develop from a really complex mix of things. Could be genetics, their early environment, maybe severe abuse, or even the opposite, like extreme indulgence. And the key thing is they often genuinely lack self-awareness. They don't see the impact they're having. They're sort of trapped in their own pattern.
Right. Understanding the pattern and that it might not be deliberate evil helps frame it. But Eddy also says this knowledge is more crucial now than ever. Why? What's changed in society that makes us maybe more vulnerable?
He points to a few big shifts. One is what he calls the society of individuals. Basically, we rely way less on those old, tight-knit communities or extended families that used to act as a kind of informal screening system for people.
Ah, like you used to sort of know everyone's history or someone in your circle did. That whole 6 degrees of separation, but on a local level, that's weakened.
It really has.
Yeah.
Families are more spread out. Communities maybe aren't as connected in the same way. So that shared knowledge, that kind of collective wisdom about who's who and what their reputation is, it's often just not there anymore. You end up interacting with people, dating, work, online, with much less background information.
And speaking of online, electronic manipulation, that's got to be huge now.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
It's incredibly easy these days to hide who you are or, create a completely false persona online. Fake photos, puffed up resumes, sob stories designed to pull at your heartstrings. You just can't rely on those old cues anymore.
That's true. And he also mentioned something about entertainment culture. How does that fit in?
Yeah, this one's interesting. It's subtle. We watch movies, TV shows, and we constantly see difficult characters, people who might even act like HCPs, suddenly have this big epiphany, this dramatic change of heart by the end.
Right, the rom-com trope where the commitment phobe suddenly proposes, where the angry boss becomes a mentor.
Exactly. And this, the source argues, sets up totally unrealistic expectations. We start thinking that real-life people with these deep-seated high-conflict patterns will also just snap out of it or change easily, which, as Eddy makes very clear, rarely happens.
Wow, that's a really insightful point. We're sort of conditioned for redemption arcs that just aren't realistic in these cases. So you combine those societal changes with just basic human nature, and we're kind of set up to be vulnerable.
That seems to be the argument. There are things about us, fundamentally human things, that are mostly good, but they open doors for manipulation by that small percentage who are high conflict, like our natural tendency to trust people.
We mostly assume people are decent.
Right. The source mentions research suggesting like 80–90% of people are generally trustworthy, which is great, but it makes us vulnerable to the 10–20% who aren't playing by the same rules.
And we're even more trusting of people in our own groups,
Right.
right? Like same background, same beliefs.
Yes, exactly. We tend to give people in our in-group the benefit of the doubt, maybe too much sometimes, because statistically about 10% in any group might still have these patterns.
Yeah.
And conversely, we might be overly suspicious of outgroups, even though most of them are probably fine, and HCP can easily exploit that bias.
We also trust our gut feelings, our emotions.
And manipulating emotions, that's a core tool for many HCPs. They can charm you, flatter you, make you feel incredibly special, or play the victim card to make you feel responsible for them. Our own desire for connection makes us susceptible.
Okay, and the last point was about self-doubt in conflicts.
Yeah, this one's tricky. Normally it's healthy. When there's conflict, most of us tend to think, okay, what did I do wrong? How did I contribute? It's how we learn and grow.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with an HCP who is constantly blaming you, that healthy self-reflection gets turned against you. You start doubting your own judgment, your own perception, maybe even internalizing their distorted view.
Wow, okay. That paints a really clear and honestly slightly scary picture of why this matters so much right now. So, okay, we understand what they are, roughly. How do we actually spot these patterns? What are the practical tools the book gives us?
So Eddy offers this really useful tool called the WB method, W-E-B. It stands for their words, your emotions, and their behavior. Think of it like a radar system to help you figure out if someone might be operating consistently in an HCP pattern versus just, having a bad day or being a garden variety jerk.
WE method. Okay, let's break that down. W is for words. What are we listening for?
You're listening for a pattern of threatening or extreme language. That all or nothing stuff we talked about. You always ruin everything. You never support me.
Yeah.
Or definitive blame. It's all your fault. Or rigid demands. It's my way or the highway. Anyone might say something like that once in a while when they're upset. But is it a consistent pattern? Is it intense? That's the warning sign.
Got it. Consistent, extreme language patterns. Okay, E is for emotions. And this is interesting. It's not just their emotions, but ours too.
Exactly. First, observe them. Are their emotions super intense? Do they seem totally unable to manage them? Do they escalate really fast? But just as importantly, tune into how you feel around them. Do you feel totally swept off your feet? Like almost irrationally impressed or in awe? Do they feel like some kind of personal savior? Do you find yourself feeling a bit defensive or maybe even embarrassed when you talk about how great they are to other people? Those really strong, sometimes confusing emotional reactions in you can be a huge clue about their intensity or maybe their manipulative skill.
That's fascinating. Using your own gut reaction as a diagnostic tool. Okay, B is for behavior. What are we looking for there?
Look for aggressive actions that they justify by claiming they're somehow special or superior, like rules don't apply to me. Do they feel entitled? Do they ignore normal social boundaries? Do they publicly humiliate people? Do they seem to lack empathy, like they just don't register or care how others feel? Are they constantly demanding to be the center of attention?
And this connects back to that 90% rule you mentioned earlier.
It does. It's a useful gut check. Ask yourself, is this behavior something that 90% of people would just not do in this situation? The source gives this example of a friend whose date lightly slapped her butt on the second date.
Whoa, okay.
Right. Maybe it seemed minor in isolation to some, but it was way outside the norm for a second date. Most guys wouldn't do that. It felt off because it was off. It suggested a potential pattern of boundary pushing or entitlement.
That makes total sense. It's not just the action itself, but how unusual it is, how outside the bounds of typical behavior. That's the flag. Okay, so the book delves into specific types of HCPs, right? Though the core WEB method applies across the board. Can we touch on a few examples just to see how these patterns manifest differently?
Sure. So take the narcissistic HCP pattern. They're often driven by this deep need to be seen as a winner and avoid being seen as a loser at all costs. This can lead them to attack the messenger, not the message, especially if the message challenges their image. Lance Armstrong is mentioned as a public example often discussed through this lens, attacking those who revealed his doping because that threatened his winner status. They might seek revenge if they feel publicly shamed.
Okay. And then there's the borderline pattern, the love you, hate you dynamic.
Right. That's characterized by really intense, unstable relationships. They often engage in splitting, seeing people or situations as either all good or all bad, idolizing one minute, completely devaluing the next. These intense swings might be hidden initially, but often become clear in close relationships after, say, 9-12 months. A core fear of abandonment can trigger intense rage, sometimes leading to extreme actions like false accusations or distortion campaigns, spreading rumors to undermine someone. The source gives an example of a couple, Tom and Kara, where Kara's splitting even involved blaming their baby during conflict.
Wow, that's intense. Then there's the antisocial type, sociopaths, psychopaths.
Yeah.
That sounds like the most dangerous one.
They often lack a conscience, feel no remorse. The source differentiates a bit. Psychopaths might enjoy cruelty, while con artists just don't care who they hurt to get what they want. They can be very hard to spot because they're masters of manipulating trust. There's an example of Paul, a supposed ex-con who charmed and conned his whole church. Bernie Madoff is a larger scale example. Massive harm, less about personal cruelty maybe, more about the con. Often, even close family, like Madoff's, don't know the full truth. Anne Rule's story about knowing Ted Bundy casually, finding him charming, it's chilling how normal they can seem.
It really is. The deception factor is terrifying. And the paranoid type.
Paranoid HCPs are driven by excessive fear and suspicion. But unlike general paranoia, it often leads them to target others. They interpret neutral things as hostile or conspiratorial. They might keep fears private for a while, but if they feel threatened enough, they can lash out, sometimes extremely. Examples include Lassiter, a neighbor convinced others were plotting against him, leading to aggression, or Monica, a coworker whose constant unfounded complaints, harassment, sabotage, theft, being followed created huge conflict and lawsuits. Everything gets filtered through that lens of being under attack.
Okay, so the different types help understand the flavor, what drives them, maybe winner, loser, abandonment, fear, getting something, being targeted. But the core stuff, all or nothing. Intense emotions, extreme behavior, the blame, that's the common thread. So WEB helps us spot them. But once you know or strongly suspect someone fits this pattern, how do you actually deal with them? There's another method for that, right? CARS.
Yes. The CARS method, C-A-R-S. It stands for connecting, analyzing, responding, and setting limits. And the absolute key thing to remember here is the goal. Manage the interaction, protect yourself, maybe de-escalate things. The goal is not to change their personality. That's usually not realistic.
Right. Manage, don't try to fix. Okay. C is for connecting. How on earth do you connect with someone who's high conflict? Seems counterintuitive.
You connect using empathy, attention, and respect. Ear statements, Eddie calls them sometimes. But you tailor it. With antisocial types, maybe focus more on respect and clear boundaries. Empathy could be exploited. With paranoid types, you might validate the feeling, wow, that sounds really frightening, or I can see that's upsetting, without actually agreeing with their suspicious story. You connect with the emotion, not the potentially distorted belief.
Okay, acknowledge the feeling, don't co-sign the narrative. Makes sense. A is for analyzing.
This is about discussing options or choices. Frame things so they feel like they have some control, but within boundaries you set. The book gives an example. A demanding narcissistic type shows up wanting help now. You could say, okay, I can give you about 5 minutes on this specific issue right now, or if you schedule time next week, I can dedicate a full hour to it. Which works better for you? You offer choices, but the choices respect your limits.
That's smart. Giving them agency, but on your terms. Okay, R is responding. And this involves another acronym, right? BIFF.
Exactly. BIFF. Brief, informative, friendly, firm. This is gold, especially for responding to hostile emails, texts, accusations. Anywhere things can escalate fast in writing.
Brief means?
Keep it short. Really short. A sentence or two. A short paragraph max. No long defenses. No detailed explanations.
Informed, yes.
Stick purely to objective facts. Don't get sucked into their emotional drama, their accusations, their narrative. Just state the relevant, neutral facts.
Friendly.
Keep your tone non-adversarial. No sarcasm, no anger, no defensiveness. You're trying to lower the temperature, not win the argument.
And firm.
This means you state your piece, and then you end the discussion on that specific hostile point. You don't keep going back and forth. Example, they email. You never return calls. You're ignoring me. You reply, hi, Name. I understand you're waiting for a call back. My usual turnaround is 2-3 business days regarding the project deadline. You briefly inform, stay friendly, and firmly pivot away from the accusation. It stops the cycle.
Okay. Connect. ER. Analyze. Options. Respond. BIFF. And S, the last one, seems critical. Setting limits.
Absolutely essential. You have to protect yourself. Don't get drawn into their endless blame stories. Don't try to be their therapist, constantly soothing their anxiety or correcting their thinking. And definitely avoid trying to convince them they're wrong or overreacting. The source says that almost always backfires, makes them dig in, become more defensive, and focus even more on you as the problem. Sometimes you just have to calmly say, I'm not discussing this further, or we need to drop this now. Tone is key, calm and firm.
And sometimes the limit has to be bigger, more final.
Yes. The reality is you might have to end relationships, personal ones, work ones. If the pattern is persistent and causing real harm, ending contact might be the only healthy option. If firing someone, say with a paranoid pattern, using neutral language like our working styles aren't compatible, is often safer than directly confronting their behavior, which could trigger retaliation.
That makes sense. Protect yourself first. Now, a big challenge mentioned is getting others to see it, right? Because HCPs can be so different in public versus private.
Oh, that's incredibly common and really isolating for the person targeted. The HCP might be charming, successful, seem totally fine to outsiders, while all the negativity and blame is directed at one specific person or happens behind closed doors. It makes the target feel doubted, like they're crazy, when they try to explain.
And that can lead to these negative advocates?
Exactly. People who aren't HCPs themselves, but they get completely sucked into the HCP story. They believe the distortions, take the HCP side, and might even actively campaign against the actual target. They're essentially allies of the HCP, but usually because they've been misled.
So how do you push back against that? How do you find a positive advocate, someone who will listen and understand?
The book suggests a very structured approach, using the example of Angelica dealing with a difficult boss. When you go to someone for help, HR, an ombudsman, a mutual friend, present concrete evidence. The strategy is outline 3 specific patterns of behavior, and for each pattern, provide 3 specific examples: what happened, when, where.
3 patterns, 3 examples each. That's very specific. Why that structure?
Because it demonstrates a clear, consistent pattern without overwhelming the listener. Too much detail and people tune out. Too little, and it sounds like isolated incidents. This 3x3 structure is concise but compelling. For Angelica, it was things like pattern 1, sudden outbursts, example 1, example 2, example 3. Pattern 2, taking credit for her work, example 1, 2, 3. Pattern 3, false public image versus private negativity, example 1, 2, 3. It makes a problem undeniable.
It gives the helper something concrete to grasp. And what about people who are just skeptical? The three theories idea.
Right. This is a way to open minds without being confrontational. You present the situation from three viewpoints. Theory 1, your perspective, what you experienced. Theory 2, the HCP's likely perspective, how they seem to see it, even if distorted. Theory 3, the HCP theory itself, the possibility that this person has a predictable high-conflict pattern explaining the whole dynamic. It invites the skeptic to consider all possibilities, including the one where you're dealing with a known pattern, not just a simple disagreement.
It offers a framework to understand behavior that otherwise seems baffling. Okay, so given how ingrained these patterns are, why is change so hard for HCPs?
It really comes back to that core lack of social self-awareness the source talks about. They're so focused outward on blaming others that they often just don't have the capacity or maybe the motivation to look inward, see their own contribution, or figure out how they could behave differently.
And the personality disorders themselves are just inherently resistant to change.
Pretty much. They're described as deeply entrenched lifelong patterns. There aren't specific meds for the personality disorder itself, though maybe for related symptoms like anxiety. And while therapy helps many people, it often doesn't lead to deep insight or change for HCPs. Especially antisocial types, they might just learn therapy jargon to manipulate people better.
So the tough takeaway is focus on managing your response, your boundaries, your interactions, because trying to change them is likely a losing battle.
That seems to be the most practical and protective approach, yes. That's why tools like CARS and BIFF are so powerful. They give you tools to manage the situation when the other person probably won't change.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really insightful deep dive into a difficult but incredibly relevant topic. Recognizing those predictable patterns feels like the absolute cornerstone for protecting yourself.
Definitely. Understanding the core traits, using WEB to spot them, and then having CARS and BIF in your toolkit for managing interactions. It gives you a sense of agency, a way to navigate what can feel like impossible situations.
And just knowing that, even if others don't see it, the behavior does follow patterns. That can be validating when you feel alone or doubted. It's not you, it's a recognized dynamic.
Exactly. The behavior, while disruptive, is often patterned. And patterns, unlike random chaos, can be understood, anticipated, and managed to some extent.
So the source suggests that with societal changes, technology hiding true selves, media maybe amplifying negativity, weaker community ties, we're actually more likely to encounter these patterns now.
Which leads to a pretty big question for all of us, doesn't it?
Yeah. In this world where it's harder to know who people really are and maybe negative interactions are more common, how do we keep that healthy sense of trust in others, which we need for connection, while still being savvy enough, aware enough to protect ourselves from the predictable few who might really cause harm? How do we walk that line?